Hello, and welcome to Reawaken the Dream, a course for the writer mom or anyone who has to write in little fragments of time. This course, we're on lesson number 7 and ready to start our second character trait. Can you believe it? 7 out of 35. If I do my math correctly, that's 20% of the way through the course already. Could you believe that? That's the power of just showing up every week. We'll build on the base of this information, and you're going to have a wonderful new superpower, the power of living characters. The power of living characters, as you know, is the mechanism by which you will be able to reawaken the emotions of your writing the minute you sit down to write, using 28 different character traits and a ball of emotions that are associated with each one. It has two powers. For you, it gives you the power of living characters so that you can write your characters consistently at the right emotional intensity, practically without effort. And the lovely other side is that your reader will immediately pick up on those same emotions because those emotions are common to all of us. As a quick review, the way we're going to conduct these classes and all of the classes having to do with doing the character traits is we're going to divide them into two sections. The first section, we present a series of vignettes, scenes where the character trait and the emotions associated with it are on display. The idea there is that we're trying to take our less verbal nature and teach it a word to go with that ball of emotions, such that we can bring up the word and it'll bring up the emotions in the person as reliably as when you say, do you want to take the DOG for a WALK? So that is the purpose of the first section, to create that association between the new term that we're learning and the ball of emotions that belongs to that term. Then in the second section, we'll tease it apart as best we can. The interesting thing is that the reality is that confused ball of emotion. The analysis will break it apart as best we can, but the really interesting thing is that the thing that's true is the state of emotions that we're going to explore in section 1. But it is fun to see how much detail we really can break it down. And of course, the reason why we're doing this is so that we'll understand that it's the power of living characters that's the primary thing that we're trying to accomplish with these lessons. So let's begin with a brief review of lesson 1, the lesson we had last time when we introduced our first character trait, orderliness. We started with orderliness because it's the most boring trait of all. And if we could demonstrate that there was actually an emotional power associated with a word like orderliness, you would have proof in your own hands that this system works. So we took a look at the source of the emotions having to do with orderliness, and we found out that they were actually fear. We explored a number of scenarios, and we saw that the emotions involved were fear, and that the struggle was the avoidance of something that was causing fright. The loss was failure to confront it, and the sense of victory was taking that step, making that step towards conquering our fears, towards self-mastery. Then, when we got down to the details where it came to orderliness, we had a few more traits that moderate it, control it, give us additional power. And we looked at the scale, which we said was related to what's at stake in the order. Is it something trivial like, did I put this piece of junk mail in the right place? Or is it something serious and heavy that did you get a hold of your life? So that was the scale, can give us the power of the magnitude of the emotion. Then we also looked at awareness. How much was our character cognizant that they were making a choice either in favor of orderliness or to ignore orderliness? And finally, the question of agency. To what degree did our character actually even have the power to act? So those were the moderators of orderliness. And then we also looked at orderliness, and we said orderliness belongs to the balance group. And the funny thing about all of the traits in the balance group, even though we only have one right now, is that they all involve achieving a balance between chaos and rigidity. And that meant there were two ways to fail. You could fail by letting chaos rule, not bringing any orderliness into your life, or you could fail by letting orderliness rule your life and not being able to get out of that trap and find that there are things besides orderliness going on in your life. So that's a review of the trait of orderliness. So now, are you ready for this week's character trait? This week's trait is circumspection. Circumspection. Could I find another boring one? Looking around. Circumspection. Let's go through a few scenarios and see if we can find some drama in circumspection. The stranger rides into town, ties his horse up at the hitching post, opens the doors, and enters the saloon. He stands there, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the light. His hands are resting on his gun belt, and his pinky finger is in touch with his gun. His eyes have adjusted now, and one by one he looks around the room. Everyone is staring at him, of course, but one by one, as he looks back and gazes at them individually, they look away. They break their gaze. All except for one person sitting at the bar. He returns his gaze and stares at him intently. The stranger eyes the gentleman at the bar, looks him up and down, from his toes to his head, settles at his waist. The man is not wearing a gun. He's standing there with his drink in his hands, and the stranger notices that his fingers are beginning to twitch. Ah, he thinks. He draws himself up straight, takes his hands off his gun belt, gestures to the crowd and says, "What do you say, folks? Should I buy this man a drink?" And he saunters up to him and slaps him on the back. "Bartender, get this man a drink." The bar, everyone is a little more relaxed now, but they're still a little bit wary of what's going on, still giving the scene great attention. The bartender pours the drink and backs away. The well-dressed man turns to the stranger and says, "You looking for trouble?" The man looks back. "Nope, I'm looking to avoid it." "Seems like you got this place pretty well sewed up. If I've judged things right, I guess maybe I'll just get an overnight rest here and mosey on down the road." The well-dressed gentleman looks at him and says, Seems to me I might be able to use a man like you. Bartender, get this man a drink." Circumspection. Another scene. The teen pulls up to the curb in front of the house, and as he parks his car, he gets out of the car and he can already hear music coming from the house, the place he's headed. He closes the door, walks around the car, checks out how he's parked. Yeah, the back's out a little bit, sticks away from the curb a little bit, but yeah, it's okay. It's okay. He runs his hands through his hair, composes himself, and heads up to the door. Rings the doorbell. The door opens and the music is just deafening. And what is that he's smelling? Uh-oh. a guy in his 20s, standing there with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, looking at him and saying, "You coming in or not?" The kid turns around and goes back to his car and drives off. Circumspection. Another scene. Another teenager, a girl this time. She's sitting on her bed and she's got 5 letters spread around her, all with impressive, formal looking envelopes and fancy logo seals. The first one arrived 4 days ago. She was so excited. She'd been accepted to college. She was so happy that one of the places she'd applied and said yes. She began immediately to make all kinds of plans in her mind about what it was going to be like to go there. The following day, 2 letters arrived, and they were both yeses. At this point, she was very overwhelmed, and the tears started streaming down her cheeks. Her mother came over. She didn't know what was going on. Then she realized and she said, "Oh, honey, any college would be proud to have you. I am proud of you. Look at you." And now she had received yes answers from all 5 colleges. She had them spread out in front of her. It was time to read them carefully, see how they fit in with her life and with the life of her family, and make a choice. Circumspection. Another scene. This is a classroom, upper elementary school. And next year they'll be in middle school. Students were busy, and the teacher has her head down. She hears a scuffle. She looks up and thinks to herself, "Keith again." She looks over, and this little guy, he's not even a big guy, he's red in the face, and he's just pummeling a much bigger kid. "Keith," she shouts, exasperated with him. But something catches in her heart, and she glances around. There's 3 girls in his vicinity. 2 of them are looking right back at her with worried expressions on their face. And the 3rd girl is looking at Keith, and she's got a lot of sympathy in her eyes. This makes the teacher take a second look and takes a look at Keith's victim. He's struggling to suppress a chuckle, and he looks very smug. Oh. Circumspection. So now we get to do our analysis of circumspection. As before, we're going to be looking at the source, and we're going to be looking at the triad of emotions, and then we'll look at some modifiers, just as we did when we analyzed orderliness. So first of all, what is the source of the ball of emotions associated with circumspection? And it's kind of a strange one, but research has shown to us what the ball of emotions is. And it's a story, well, actually it's a research experiment that can be told in the form of a setup. Here's the way the research works. There's a dog. You can see him, he's wagging his tail, and his mouth is dripping with saliva. He's got this happy face. And there's a fence, a chain link fence that he can see through, and on the other side is a bowl of yummy, 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 yummy dog food. And the dog is looking through the chain link fence. He wants the food. He wants food. Well, interesting thing about this fence, the fence only goes so far. It's just a freestanding fence. If the dog wants that food, all the dog has to do is go around that end, Or go around that end and he can get to the food. There's nothing blocking him from the food. He goes this way a little bit. He goes this way a little bit. He goes this way a little bit. He goes, he can't take his eyes off the food. He can't take his eyes off the food. The fence is wide enough that the only way the dog can get to the food is if he takes his eyes off the food and looks at the limits of the fence. And the dog can't do that. So that's the ball of emotions that's involved in circumspection. That strange mixture of I want it, but how can I get it? What am I going to do? I get it. So that's the source of that emotional state. So what are the triad of emotions that are associated with circumspection? Well, the interesting thing is the victory state is the name itself. Ta-da! You've achieved circumspection. Circumspection is a state of power. We saw that with our stranger who came into town, who just by the very command of his attention and his noticing of all of the details of all of the people in the room, he was able to basically command the room. So you get a state of power. So the victory state is achieving the circumspection. The struggle, well, we saw the struggle. It's the source of the emotions. It's the struggle of the desire and the what are the means and the how's this going to happen. So what about the loss? If victory is you climb the hill and now you're standing on top of the hill and you can see everything, what's the loss? You didn't get up the hill? That doesn't do much to tell you anything about motion. I thought these things were supposed to bring up emotion. Well, there's a simple rule at play. If you haven't achieved the emotional state, then you haven't answered the question why. You haven't broken it down enough. Because that's the crazy thing about all of these emotions, all of these character traits, all of the struggles. They have no power at the general level. All of the power is at the level of the specificity. And the reason for that is because the struggle itself is the thing that is real. What does the dog have in mind? What is the dog's desire? This is the thing that is real, and it's fairly intangible. It's actually fairly difficult to put words to it. So therefore, failing, if you don't know why and where in the process the failure occurred, you have no power to bring up emotions. So that means that we next have to take a look at what are the choices. How can you fail to achieve circumspection? Circumspection's agents of loss. The first one is the one that we saw, the dog. The dog did not achieve the bowl of food. He couldn't take his eyes off the food enough so that he could see the whole picture. So greed itself can be the seed in a human of the first mechanism by which you can fail to achieve circumspection, and that is negligence. The interesting thing about circumspection, we already saw in the Western saga that the man who achieves circumspection has power. What is that person going to use the power for? That power can be very, very dangerously misused. It can be misused to set up a con, to many other ways to deceive the other person. It can be used in a lot of bad ways, where in which the person with the power to see past the chain link fence grabs food that isn't his by his power over those who don't have the circumspection, maybe because they just don't have the capabilities of it. But the interesting thing is that once the con man collects the money from his con and pockets it, he wants more. Greed, greed, greed. He goes out for more. He succeeds again and again and again. And the more he succeeds, the more he's focused on that prize that he's going to get. And the narrower his vision becomes. He stops doing the circumspection. And through negligence, because he's now decided he doesn't need it, he's the master of the situation, that is part of how you bring down a villain. Overconfidence, pride, leads to negligence, and the circumspection collapses. So that's one form of loss. So you can see there you get into the emotional power because you understood where the loss came from. But we have two more to look at. The next one is temerity. Fools rush in. Well, there's kind of almost another name for temerity. Youth. Young people. They're just utterly prone to temerity. So much so that if you create a character who's young, you put them in front of a scene of great danger, and you put something heroic on the other side, your reader is going to be saying, oh, no, he's not going in, is he? He's not going in, is he? Of course he's going in. That's why you put him there. Temerity. It's not like negligence. When negligence fails, the villain says, oh, drat, I should have, bop, 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 bop. When circumspection fails to temerity, the person says, huh? What? I should have thought of what? I should have done what? So that's the basic difference between negligence and temerity. But there's another one. Whoa, and this one is the ringer. This one is a real ringer. This one is called resistance, and it's the enemy within. Let me explain that a little bit. You could be having a goal to get up a hill, and you go to get up the hill, and it's slippery, and the rocks are sliding, and you can't get your foothold, and every time you go to take a step, the rocks slip, and you fall. That's not resistance. That requires a different character trait, which we will discuss at a future video, because it's an outside force. Resistance has to do with inside forces. It has to do with when you reach the point in time where, by golly, you've got it all going for you. It's all lined up. The way is clear. Why aren't you getting there? Why aren't you doing that? What is stopping you? It's some kind of internal block. And I think anyone who's ever procrastinated anything knows about resistance. It's simply the root of procrastination. If you want to give your character resistance, it's up to you as a writer to show the internal blocks. Either show him suffering from them and what's going on in his mind while he's suffering from them, or set it up that you know that he's got some internal beliefs that are going to make it difficult for him. Because that duty falls upon you, because it's all happening in your character's mind. So that's kind of a tough one to write, but it's very powerful. In part because we've all experienced it. So if you set your scene up properly, any one of us, I can read it, your reader can read it, and we can say, oh yeah, I've been there. So now it's time to talk about the group that circumspection belongs to. Circumspection belongs to a group called the insight group. And the insight group, it's kind of hard to talk about groups when you've only got one character trait. But what the insight group has in common is that they will always have those same 3 pathways to loss that we saw: negligence, um, lack of attention, and resistance. So we'll see those 3 paths to loss showing up again and again in the insight group. And the other thing that we will find that we haven't yet mentioned specifically, they have 3 requirements for victory. And the 3 requirements for victory have to do with the past, the present, and the future. In all of the insight group, the person who's achieving the insight has to remember what the lessons of the past, be able to judge correctly the circumstances of the present, and project accurately what is likely to happen in the future. So we will see these 3 requirements for victory showing up in all of the character traits of the insight group. So as of last week, we concluded the lesson with talking about the character profile. And as we said last week, the character profile diagram starts out just as a circle with 8 touch points around the rim. And we drew lines to highlight where the touch points were. And we said that we're going to make one of these for every character, no matter how minor. You're going to want at least to create one of these and put at least a few character traits around the rim. It becomes difficult to do this right away when we only have 2 traits, but you can play with it, because the interesting thing about this diagram that we talked about last week is it doesn't just matter that the trait is on the diagram, but where it falls on the diagram is also important. And so last week, we highlighted some of the character positions and we gave them names. We said that the line, horizontal line A to B, are what we call the rudder traits. Those are the character traits that form the struggles and decisions that the character is consciously making as the character goes forward in time. Those are the traits that he has the greatest awareness of those traits. This is what's happening in there now, are the traits on the rudder traits. Then we looked at C and D, and we called those the anchor traits. In these traits, the character isn't as aware of what's going on because it's just part of normal operating procedure for that character. In orderliness, we said they just naturally are tidy. In circumspection, we would say they just naturally have a tendency to look around and assess the situation before acting. It's more a part of how they operate rather than bringing it up for grabs at any given moment, whether they will or will not take the time for circumspection. And similarly, we also looked at the traits going in the other direction. We called them the wing traits. And these are traits that the character is not very likely to pay attention to. It's maybe they might remember to have circumspection, but chances are they'll just not bother, not be aware of it, or not have the tools to do it. So those are the positions that we discussed last week. But we have 2 more that we have to discuss now. We have 2 new positions. Ta-da! We have G and H. So what are G and H? Character position G we'll call the base trait. This trait is so firmly established in our character that there's virtually no chance that the character is going to wobble on that trait. That is their most solid base. When you see a character crumble on their base trait, then you have watched a character fall apart completely, and the very last stage of his falling apart will be for the base trait to crumble. Likewise, H up here is the opposite. It's the pinnacle trait. Kind of a funny one because we say these doesn't have very much. Well, this H pinnacle trait, it is highly unlikely, almost certainly unlikely, that our character will follow through with a trait that's on the H level. Except the hero's journey. When you have a story that's a hero's journey, you find a really, really interesting situation going on. You'll find that at the baseline, you will show that the hero lacks these traits, that these are a bit of a struggle and these do not exist for the hero. Then you present him with challenges where first he achieves his A and B states. He consistently achieves his rudder trait struggles, so that the rudder traits practically become secondary anchor traits. Then at that point, the wing struggles start coming into his conscious power, and he can start having power over these. And along the journey, he gains victory here and he gains victory here. And then finally, as he approaches the final triumphant moment, the pinnacle trait is within his conscious awareness, his power to decide. It's the hardest struggle of all, and he achieves it. Wow! And you've achieved the hero's journey. That's basically, if you look at books that are written on the hero's journey, you will see that progression in the books. Interestingly, when you write a book for a child or a youth, generally what you see is the same thing in operation. You'll show that he struggles a little bit with these baseline traits, but he's doing better. He learns as he goes through the book, and then you'll pick one wing trait that he has trouble with and more trouble with, and finally achieves. Ta-da! Now you have a formula for a children's book. Achieve one of your wing traits. It's like a mini hero's journey. So those are the character traits that we have for this week. Before I go into your homework, which I'm going to do next, I have a wonderful announcement. I'm very excited to say we also have another interview this week. A few weeks back, you were shown an interview with Victoria Crowder, who was one of us and a fiction writer. Well, released today, along with this lesson, is an interview with a very interesting gentleman. His name is David Rogers. He's also a member of the class. He's one of us, and he has a very interesting condition. It's called aphantasia, and it's sometimes called mind blindness. I'll let him explain it, but you will definitely want to catch that interview. It's really, really fascinating. And he'll explain how that's affected his life and how he uses a note box, not just to support his writing, but also to support his daily life, and how he's used note taking throughout his life to deal with his condition. And so you will definitely want to catch that interview. Okay, so now we can talk about homework. Okay, as always, the point of our homework assignments is to establish that connection between the keyword circumspection and the ball of emotions that we want to be able to touch when our character has the circumspection in a place where it's coming into focus in your story. So we're going to do, as always, we have 4 little assignments that you can just do. Imagine them in your head or write them out if you have time to write them out, because they're very, very handy. So the first one is you're going to write your own bring down the villain story. So in this one, you're going to talk about how was it that this villain, who used to be so good at circumspection, finally misses doing the circumspection. Your second homework assignment is going to have to do with presenting a character that's unaware of the dangers they're going into, but your audience knows about the dangers. Your third drill is going to be, how do you portray a character with internal resistance? How do you show that happening? You can imagine it, you can write it out. But how do you demonstrate what's going on in that person's head? And finally, your last one will be, what if you have a character whose circumspection is in one of these wing traits? How would that function in his life, and how might that circumspection finally become part of his conscious awareness. So those are your 4 homework assignments. And next week we'll have another character trait. And next week we'll even have a little bit more to do on our character profile diagram, because there's a little bit of difference between the traits on the left and the right. A versus B, C versus D, E versus F. It's subtle, but we'll talk about that next week. And with that, your profile diagram will be complete. And so we're going to be talking about mostly about how do we apply it as we learn more and more of the character traits. So as always, you can get the PDF in the link below. And now there is a link if you've just been watching these videos and you've never picked up the PDFs and you want to start getting the PDFs, if you join my email list using that link below, you'll get a separate email that will give you links to all of the PDFs that are currently out. So that way you can catch up quickly. And if you click them and read them, the software will know that you're up with it. Say, for example, you've already read this, you read this lesson online, you get the PDF, then the program will know that it doesn't have to present this lesson to you, that you've already got that one. So I want to thank you very much for joining us, and always don't forget to do your writing. The PDF includes note cards that you might want to make to add to your note box, but always remember the most important note cards of all are the ones that track your writing. Don't forget to track your writing. And as always, I'm Kathleen Sprackling, caregiver to the Writer Mom. Thank you. Bye-bye.